Folks, welcome to the Musical Instrument Museum in Phoenix, Arizona. And I'm joined today by an absolute hero of mine, not even because of his ability to play his apparatus, just because of the kind of human being that he is and the person that he allowed me to come into his existence, his life, and I'm not going to flatter him anymore. We just saw him on the sound check with Pat Bianchi and Carmen and Tori. Pat Martino, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you, Jake, as always.
Haven't seen you personally in about 5 years.
It's been a while.
Yeah, and I remember I was totally, when I showed up at your brownstone in Philly, I was floored. But, I wanted you to, something that does not get covered enough. I wanted you to talk about, I interviewed Tootie Heath a couple times, and he talked about really starting out in R&B bands, before jazz, before bebop. And I would like you to talk about your experience with Billy Paul. A lot of people don't know you played with him.
Sure.
And the idea of the blues, the adherence to the blues and the spirituals, and how it intermeshed with jazz at that time.
Well, I think it's important for you to recall the limitations I have on memory due to the operations. That still is in existence. I still have margins that are very difficult to recall detail.
Okay, so let's pick.
So when it comes down to Billy Paul,
yeah,
we're going back to, good Lord, the 70s, I think.
It was the mid-'60s, the late '60s. Because Bobby Rose was talking about you had wrapped up a stint with him.
Yeah.
He was on the road with another band. But I guess here's the point, is the idea, just the blues. Can you riff on the blues, man, and how it relates to jazz? In my ears today, or when I hear your band there's an undercurrent of the blues. It's the same kind of stuff that came out. Julian Priester was talking about it in Chicago. Tootie Heath. These guys didn't start by playing bebop. They were playing blues.
Sure.
That's all you can, just free associate on that.
Well, the blues is one of the first things that is liquid enough and simple enough that a youngster can begin to experience an expanding form of improvisation with it. There's not too many chord forms to play substitutions through. There's a feeling that it demands of you that transcends the use of scales or modes. It's your feet are on the ground, and it's a music of our culture, during those times. That's what you heard in the nightclubs. A lot of the clubs with the local bands were playing the blues. You learned how to play, playing the blues. And of course, after a while, certain players, certain individuals began to expand into greater additions to the structure itself through an appetite that demanded that. And that's where the change into bop and hard bop and even avant-garde began to take place.
But as far as Billy Paul, did you ever go on the Chitlin circuit, as far as you can remember, ever, with cats like Billy? I just didn't,
Not necessarily with Billy himself, but of course I really went on the Chitlin circuit with the Lloyd Price band, and with Charlie Erland, and with Don Patterson and Billy James, with Sonny Stitt, with Gene Emmons. The Chitlin circuit was all of the black clubs in the different districts, city by city, and you went from one to another, from city to city.
Did they? Were there B3 players? Like Erland, did he have a hearse? Did he rent a hearse to keep the B3? To keep the B3? I mean, this was on.
So did Don Patterson.
Yeah, and this was home for you. When you went there, you felt like it was home.
Of course.
Going back, I talked to Buzzy Featon from Paul Butterfield blues band, and he kind of opened my mind a little bit to a concept, and I wanted to talk to you about it. When Mickey, again going back, Bobby Rose was 18 years old, you were 9 or 10. You walked into the barber shop, Mickey had you playing, whatever, he said, listen to my son. And you played a flawless version of Moonlight in Vermont. Okay, and so at that point, but my question for you is this: were you more interested, Pat, in the sound that was coming out of your apparatus as opposed to technique or facility? And I want you to talk to younger peeps today about liking the sound that comes out of your apparatus as opposed to demonstrating monster chops. If that was the journey that you
I was more interested in controlling the attention of those who were watching me, who were listening to me. As far as playing the instrument, that was always second nature. I never really, I didn't know what to play. I mean, that's why I was copying records at that time. I wanted attention. At that time, my main, the power of my apparatus, my artistic apparatus, was my ego, which changed over the years into greater depth in terms of what my interests had become. But at the beginning, I wanted attention. An only child, you know.
But as it relates to people, cats today that are not learning in the street scholar mentality, that we just talked about, being on the Chitlin circuit, being in the blues clubs, you played these clubs, dawn sessions. Cats today are growing up in academia learning, so they're learning how to play styles, okay?
Sure.
And so they learn the styles, but they don't necessarily love the sound that's coming out of their apparatus. And I just want you to talk about the sound. Similar to the water, the Japanese illustration of the water that you always talk about, the flow, and the idea of sound, and wanting to create good sound, and sound that's palatable to your ear before you're just playing a bossa.
It goes far beyond the music itself. I mean, you must consider the culture that surrounds the music, that amplifies the interaction. The player is only one part of the apparatus. The audience is another part of it. The followers, the environment, the surroundings that it takes place within have to be part and parcel of the history of that form of art. The sound of the room, the people that work in it, have to be pleased with the presence of it. The people that come in as customers had to come there for that reason, because of the pleasure of it. You can't even touch the surface of that when you get involved in academia. It doesn't even count. The only thing that could be done is a story can be told about it. And you can absorb a general outline of its historic time, you know. So that's something that I think in some ways is distractive to what's happening right now. I think if I were of that age, participating as the young are at this time in life, I would be more interested in the culture itself, interaction, social interaction within it, using it as a vehicle for closer interaction publicly, socially, gaining reward from the totality of the experience. And the music is only one part of it. And if that is the only thing that an individual is interested in the study of, that individual has dedicated themselves to craftsmanship, not to the art. The art contains all of the other facets of reality that surround these things.
Could you unpack the facets for the audience? This is absolutely essential for younger people to understand this. Craftsmanship versus musician.
I think that the greatest formula for the totality of it is an individual's interest in precision. And that doesn't mean precision as an instrumentalist, as a tenor player, saxophone, alto player, as a guitarist, as a pianist. These things are separate and remain second nature to the individual who supplements what's needed to use such things as a power that opens the doors to social reality. So it comes down to precision and focus and the attention upon the moment. And whatsoever in that moment comes to the forefront. That's the demand from reality itself for us to pay attention to what's needed here and now. As far as what we study in school, that's one phase of development. That particular phase comes to exposure, to demand. And the demand, once again, is precision. And that, in that state of it, we're talking about educational precision, to follow up on the demands of the teachers, and to move toward doing the best you can for the highest rate of judgmental markings. You want to graduate. And graduation is the culmination of precision. And so too does that go on and on and on and on. In fact, it's still going on in my life at this very moment. It's precision to be as clear and as realistic as possible. And I'm not thinking about guitar, and guitar has nothing to do with my pleasure at the moment. My pleasure, as it always is precision.
Mm-hmm.
That comes down to enjoying a fine meal. It's the moment, it's here and now.
And that's what you've helped me with in my journey as well, as well as receiving the Tao. You know, Pat, I wanted to ask you, I've had two interviews with Julian Priester this week. He talked about Sun Ra being the precursor to, and he hates the term free music, but just that early 60s music that was going on, not West Coast jazz, but on the East Coast.
Sure.
How did you learn to play this within the spaces of the music and not rely on the drummer to be, free them up to play music so that you could keep the rhythm? Sun Ra would point to Julian and say, play, okay? He had to learn how to keep time within the spaces of the music. And I think, I was wondering if you had an opportunity to play with someone along the lines of Sun Ra, or how you actually got to learn to not rely on the rhythm keepers to keep time.
Speaking of Julian Priester, Julian and I worked in the same band with Lloyd Price. And Julian was in the band, Slide Hampton was in the band. The Tarantine brothers were in the band. Charlie Persik was the drummer. There were so many players. One of the arrangers, aside from Slide Hampton, was Onzie Matthews from Texas. Red Holloway was in the band. It was a band full of historic individuals in jazz.
Mm.
And the band would play for, I would say, up to 60, 70 minutes. And then Lloyd would come out on stage and would sing his hits. But the majority of the output was heavy jazz, hardcore jazz.
Would he let you guys open the first set and then he'd play the second set kind of thing? Because that's what Hank Ballard would do.
One big show.
Wow.
It was 60 or 70 minutes of the big band,
Wow.
and then Lloyd would come out for 30 minutes.
But the big band was heavy jazz.
The big band was the greatest players that were active at that time on the scene, and we were positioned out of New York City, you know. So how did I learn? I learned on the spot. I didn't know how to read music. I would say to Red Holloway, as they were setting up the music stands, I would say, Red, how does this go? And I would point to where the guitar was supposed to play a certain thing. And Red was kind enough to just quickly, silently play it off to me, hum it to me. And that's how I learned.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned through mistake. And then I learned when Slide or Anzi would point to me for a guitar solo. And I would start the solo, and by, I would say, maybe 20 bars in, I would hear in the background the band saying, yeah, 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 you know. And that to me said a lot with regards to what I attempted in doing and what I began to do. The more I attempted, the more that happened. And the more that happened, the less I gave thought to how to bring it about. It began to become a very natural thing.
The trust from your bandmates dropped all that thinking away, and then you just began to burn.
Exactly.
Pat, I just wanted to ask you before we go, you told me an emotional story on the air. We've done 6 interviews on the radio, a couple in person, and he had not passed away yet, but I'd like you to just talk a little bit about, you told me a story about Delmar Brown and about when you were down in Miami at the studio. Next door was Earth, Wind, and Fire. You guys were cutting Joyous Lake. Delmar's dad was sick. He said, listen, this is, paraphrasing, this is important. You need to go home.
Yeah, that's what I said to Delmar.
Can you talk to Delmar's left us since that time?
Yes.
You talk about what he means to, you and the lexicon of music.
Well, I think it's, when it's personal, like it was and it still is between Delmar and I, it's a little different than the public, what the public could ever understand. There was something in Delmar that he would enter a moment, and the moment would be a brilliant moment with his presence in it. Lovable to the max. Originally, nothing but music, nothing but the arts, always focused upon expression and not afraid to express his feelings, no matter what they were, under any circumstances. A very admirable artist, Delmar Brown. So I could say it's a big loss, but that's a very selfish thing to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it is personal, which is hard to convey what exactly. I mean, there was a spiritual bond there.
Of course. Yeah.
Do you remember? You did tell me about the session when you knew that was the rhythm section that you wanted. When you tried those guys out, he was an exceptional player. One thing, Pat, the first time I met you, you were playing with Tyrone Brown, and I came up to you at the bar during intermission, and I asked you, I said, did you ever know Jerry Garcia? And you said, actually, we were planning on making an album together, and then Jerry died.
Right.
And that was like a long time ago, but I'm thinking today on the ride up from Tucson, I'm saying, I gotta ask Pat, when did you meet Jerry? How did your relationship with Jerry even begin? Well,
it began with the word had come out that Jerry was very interested in my playing and had listened to me. So it was the same thing, in the same way that Peter Townsend came into my life, and Carlos Santana. That phase of the music business, that particular floor in the building of it, became active to me. And I began to visit groups like The Who. And after they would do their performance at the stadium in Philadelphia, I would pop in to where I knew they were going to go have a bite to eat, which had been cleared out so that they would have their privacy there. And since I knew the owners of the place, I would go in and surprise them at the table. And that's how I met Pete Townsend. Personally, of course, professionally, we knew each other. We knew each other well. The same thing with Jerry Garcia.
Did you meet him when you went to California the first time?
Hard to remember. I don't remember exactly what brought it about. The same thing with Santana.
So Santana too. So you were heavily inspiring, and to those guys, heavily inspiring. And when I think in some ways you talk about precision. I listen to Jerry and you a lot, so I don't think it was necessarily your lead playing. I think it was your rhythm accompaniment when you hear Pat Martino playing alongside Eddie Green soloing or whoever soloing. Your rhythm chops are emblazing, and I hear Jerry trying to do the same thing. But that album never. You actually were going to do an album with him.
Yeah.
Wow. Can you just talk about? I think one of my things that I've learned along the way is that when I hear you play a solo, and I think, well, when I was first starting this journey, I said, he's just trying to get bliss. But actually, as I've learned, Pat, with you guys, spiritual. I just would ask you, if you didn't have music, if you couldn't play music, would you die spiritually?
No.
Tell the audience why. Well, what is interesting is what is a gateway for you now? Because some cats would say, if I can't chant, if I can't play music, I would die.
I think there was a time when I would say that. I would react in a similar way. But after the brain operation that I had, I began to really focus much more on the moment, on now, than on what I would like it to be. So therefore, no matter what it is, I'm learning something about myself in the process. My reaction, my failure to gain a positive surge of enjoyment from that moment, or the lacking of it for that moment, and what causes that due to my desire versus reality. And in the end, to hopefully gain the ability to step outside and view all of these things from a neutral distance, and to begin to see my identity no longer coupled with manipulation. The manipulation of music over the individual and how he or she fits into it, how he or she is successful because of it, how he or she meets others. Some are good, some are bad because of it. But to be at a distance and to view the human experience in a much broader context, and always in that state of mind, the only thing that's real is the moment, is now. So it's difficult for me to realistically participate in reality itself if I have a favorite type of reality. Reality doesn't work like that. And I have to be as realistic as possible.
You've continued to keep me in the moment. It's a rendezvous with now. Pat Martino, thank you, my brother.
My left hand.
Cheers, my brother.
Cheers.